Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning is somehow one of the better Mission Impossible movies, so let's talk about it. As always, this video will have spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, head over to my shorts or my TikTok and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. But without further ado, let's talk about Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. So somehow this franchise just continues to top itself. The action in this movie was amazing, which is something I'm definitely going to touch on in this video, but this movie also had a great story and surprisingly had some really good emotional stakes as well. Tom Cruise is just simply the man, and at this point in his career, coming off Top Gun Maverick, then going right into this, I'm convinced this guy is never going to make a bad movie again, so I will pretty much watch any project he is in from here until the end of time. But anyways, let's get into what this movie is about. So in this movie, Ethan and his crew are up against an enemy and a weapon that, if it falls into the wrong hands, could mean the end of humanity as we know it. So Ethan and his team must travel throughout the world to stop this thing from falling into the wrong hands and eventually save humanity. As always, let's get into the good, and starting things off with the good is the action. Now, the action set pieces in this movie were absolutely amazing and is pretty much the reason I went to see this film. And what made these sequences so good is that they were mostly practical, which immersed you in the movie so much more. And honestly, it just made it that much more impressive when you watch these action sequences on screen, knowing they did that for real. Now, they could have easily used CGI for a lot of these action sequences, and honestly, I probably wouldn't have batted an eye. But the fact that they went that extra mile to do this for real just honestly made the movie better in my opinion, and is greatly appreciated from a movie fan. On top of that, these action sequences all had their own individual stakes, which made it a lot more intense. These action scenes weren't just there to be there, they all had meaning behind it, which again, made this movie a lot better. And if you haven't seen some of the behind the scenes videos of how they pulled some of these action sequences off, then I highly suggest you go watch them because they're pretty cool in my opinion. And next up for the good is the story. Now, I really enjoyed the story here, even though it was pretty typical for a Mission Impossible movie. I mean, essentially there's this thing or weapon that could destroy the world or destroy something big, and the good guys have to get there and get it before the bad guys do. Otherwise, you know, world destruction. But what I think made this story different is that there were some really good emotional stakes in this movie, as we got to explore Ethan's past before he joined the IMF. And this is something that made not only the villain really interesting because he was from Ethan's past, but also the relationship that our villain Gabriel had with Ethan. We got to see Ethan kind of struggle with, hey, are you gonna complete your mission and just stop this guy from getting the key? Or are you gonna seek out revenge because he killed someone that you cared about from your past? And that was just something really cool to see Ethan kind of battle with throughout this movie, because you didn't know if he was gonna seek out revenge or just simply get this key and let this guy live. And that leads me right into the next good thing about this movie, and that is our villain Gabriel, played by Eazy Morales. Now, I really liked his character in this movie because it always seemed like him and this AI that he was working for were always one step ahead of Ethan and his crew. And this really made you wonder after those big action sequences if the good guys won or if it was just all a part of their big plan. And I thought this was pretty evident in the scene where Rebecca Ferguson dies, because this scene had so many twists and turns in it. It was probably one of the best action sequences in this movie, but ultimately it ended the way Gabriel said it was gonna end, which made him and this AI villain seem pretty unbeatable, and I really like that. And finally, for the good, and I just wanted to briefly touch on this before we move on, but that is the addition of Haley Atwell's character Grace in this movie. And honestly, her character just fit in so well to this Mission Impossible universe. She was a lot of fun to watch on screen, she was really interesting, and her character just had a really good arc overall. Now let's get into the so-so. And first off for the so-so, and I really don't know how to explain this, but during the beginning of the movie, when they were trying to explain the plot, it was very confusing and very kind of hard to catch on, in my opinion. Now, honestly, this is probably just a me thing, but I did have a little bit of trouble kind of grasping the plot right there in the beginning, because I just felt it was explained in a weird way. But once we got to the middle of this movie and things started to make a little bit more sense, the plot was pretty pretty simple. So again, this was probably just a me thing right there in the beginning where I thought the plot wasn't explained all that well with everything going on, and it kind of took me a second to get a grasp of everything, which is probably why it took me a second to really get tuned into this movie. But once I got tuned in and understood everything, it was awesome all the way through. And next up for the so-so, I have the kind of cliffhanger ending that we got. Now, I do think this movie did a better job with this cliffhanger ending than some of the previous movies that we've gotten this year, because at the end of the day, this movie did feel like a pretty complete story, even though it was a part one. Ethan essentially accomplishes his mission in this movie, and all we have to do now is defeat the villain. And even Hayley Atwell's character gets a nice little character arc, as I said before, and her story kind of rounds out very nicely. But with all that said, we do finally get to the part that we've been waiting for this whole movie, and that's getting to the submarine and shutting down this AI that they call the Entity, and then the movie just ends. So when you look at it from that perspective, that's really the only thing that feels kind of incomplete for me in this movie, and that's kind of why I have this ending right here in the so-so. But otherwise, it was a pretty good ending, and I felt more satisfied walking out of this movie than I did like Across the Spider-Verse, and then especially Fast X. I'm gonna forget about that movie. And finally, let's get into the bad. And the only thing I have here is, I have to admit, this movie was long. And this could just be me getting tired of these blockbusters getting longer and longer. But once again, I think this movie definitely could have been cut down to under 2 hours and 30 minutes. I mean, it was nearly 3 hours, and I just don't think it really needed to be that long. There was a lot of downtime between the action sequences, and when you were in those scenes with a little bit more dialogue, it kind of felt like sometimes you were just kind of waiting for that next big action sequence, and that's where this movie felt really long for me. So overall, I enjoyed this whole thing all the way through, but did it need to be nearly 3 hours? I don't think so. But overall, as of right now, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning is one of the better Mission Impossible movies in my opinion. It tops itself in terms of action, and it has a really good story with some good emotional stakes. It's a lot of fun and super entertaining, and if you're a fan of just action movies in general, then you're gonna love this one. Those are my thoughts on Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments. And as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shop easyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.